Hey, Eddie and Zotto, GamerNode.com, and I'm back again with another board game review. This one's from Tasty Minstrel Games, and it's designed by Alex Churchill. The game is Steamworks, and it's a worker placement game for 2 to 4 players, in which players will be sending their mechanics out to collect components and power sources so that they can build devices of varying sizes and capabilities that they and their opponents can place their workers on to gain the benefits of those machines. And it's an engine building game, so you're going to be wanting to build, plan how you're going to be scoring your victory points using all of these different options as they come out differently each game in each of the game's 3 ages, so that you can be the best of the inventors around the table. It's unique. But is it fun? I think so. Let's check it out. So this is the table set up for a 2-player game of Steamworks. It's kind of compressed to fit everything that we need to fit on camera. We have our 2 players, each of whom begins with a couple of components. You can see they have their picture on their starting components, which is really cool. So you see that this guy gets an upgrader and a manufacturer, which are listed here, upgrader and manufacturer, as well as 2 additional sources. He'll get a steam source, and he'll get a clockwork source. She gets a scroll rack and a librarifier, as well as a clockwork source and a steam source. So you're hearing all these names. What is Steamworks? Well, Steamworks is a worker placement game that is really an engine building game, quite literally. You have each player going around the table, taking turns, pulling tiles off of the board based on the actions that they take with their mechanics. And they'll take those things into their supply, either the machine components or the sources. And then on subsequent turns, when they have the components and sources required, they build what the game calls devices of varying sizes in front of them, which actually give them new places to place their workers. So beginning the game, they each have 4 spots on their home board here. And going throughout the game, they'll build out a wide array of varying size devices to then place their workers on any of these sources that are connected to the various components in the game. Additionally, they'll be able to place on each other's devices as well. So part of the game is actually building devices that you think will entice your opponents to place there, because any player whose devices are used by the other players gains benefits in the form of victory points or coins in a 2-player game. And that's actually an interesting mechanic that we'll talk about in a little bit. So the way the game works is on each turn, a player will take their first mechanic, and the number listed below these mechanics indicates the number of coins that it costs to use that mechanic. So in this case, this first mechanic is free, and the player can place in one of their spots. In this case, it means that this player can take the very last component in one of the rows out on the conveyor belts. And the way that these work is that the game goes in 3 ages that are revealed through time based on how frequently players are using each other's components. And after each full round, which is defined by all the players having used their mechanics or passed for that round, the last component will slide off of each conveyor belt, and then the rest of them will slide forward, and new ones will come out, thus giving players new components to look at and potentially pull into their personal supply for future building. And then the ones that did come off actually go back underneath the pile for that particular age. The second action a player can do on their main board is pull one of the 3 types of sources. In this game, we have clockwork sources, steam sources, and electrical sources. And you can see in the artwork on the tiles that they each have different types of connectors. The electrical source connects at the center of the tile and can only connect with components that also have that type of connection. The clockwork source connects with gears at the edge of the tile and can only connect with components with that type of connection. And the steam source connects via pipes and can only connect via that sort of connection. Some components, which come out later, might only be able to be powered by electricity, or maybe they're only powered by steam, or maybe they're only powered by clockwork power. So it's important that players have the correct types of sources in order to power the components that they're intending to build as part of the devices that they want to then use the actions for. Some can be built in such a way that an electrical source is connected on one side, but maybe a clockwork source is connected on another side, and maybe a steam source is connected on another side. So in the case of this device here, a player would now have all the players would have three separate options for placing on this manufacturer component, each of which gives a different result in the action. So if you place on the clockwork source, you're now able to build a component of size 2, one source and one component. Build a device of size 2. If you placed on the steam source, you can build a device of size 3, one source of any type and 2 components. And finally, with electrical, in this case, you could build one source with 3 components attached, or at least one source, and this would probably end up being a size 4 with 2 components and another source on the other side, but they don't need to be built in squares this way. And the reason I say that is because when you build in a square, you kind of have to have a sort of checkerboard pattern where a component is next to a source and a source is next to a component, never a source next to a source or a component next to a component. In this case, these are 2 different devices. So wherever there's a source, players can place a mechanic and take an action anywhere on the board. If the green player were to place over on this player's device, then this purple player would earn the first in a stack of clockwork tokens, each of which corresponds to a victory point at the end of the game. And when each of these stacks, which I'll move this out of the way so you can see it, is depleted, that means it's the end of the age, and you move on to the next age in the following round. And then all of these components would then come out, giving players new options. In age 3, when these come out, you'll see a lot more components that are dedicated to generating points, paying money for points, or paying actual components directly back to the bank over here for points. And you can pay sources for points. There's a variety of ways to earn points. And also, each of these components generally scores a point. So players will be earning points not only for the particular engine that they build with the intention to run those machines and generate points, but also simply for building as much as they can and creating a tableau full of 1-point tiles and some even 2-point tiles. Some other actions that we didn't go over are just straight up building a device or activating one of your own sources. And this can be useful if someone's already on one of your sources and you're like, damn, I really wanted to use my upgrader. So that gives you the opportunity to still have free reign to use your devices and sort of an impetus to be the person who is building as opposed to just freeloading off of other people. So the game goes on in this way, and in later rounds, players will gain additional mechanics. You see, this is white for the white H2 stack, and this is red for the red H3 stack. You'll have 4 mechanics by the end of the game, and this will be important because you'll also have a big tableau of varying size devices, maybe with sources that power multiple components, or maybe components that can be activated multiple times by different sources. And you might even get yourself an automaton, who, when you place on the source connected to the automaton, you pull that automaton to your board as an additional worker for that round, who works for free. So that's something you'll always want to do. And also in later rounds, this payment mechanic becomes very critical, because say I've placed both my 0 and 1 workers out, and I've paid the coins associated with them. Now I've come to my 2 worker, and say I may have an automaton, and maybe I can get money, but maybe I can't. And maybe I can't afford this 2 worker. I only have 1 coin. So in this case, I would be stuck. I can't use my 2 or my 3, except for the fact that you can pull your mechanic back, and instead of paying those 2 coins, you can earn those 2 coins. And then, for your next turn, you're opened up to pay the 3 coins required for this last worker to make it out there onto the board and activate something. So this is a really interesting mechanic, and I like it a lot. And the even more interesting thing is that these are double-sided boards, and some of them have different costs associated with using their different mechanics, and all of them have different starting actions. So this is really interesting, this A and B side. A for the standard game, and B to shake it up a little and give each player a little bit of a variable set of powers, and that's super cool. And that's the whole game. Players are using their mechanics to take actions either on their personal board, out in front of them, or in front of other players to get new components into their supply, new sources into their supply, build out and upgrade all of their devices, take those actions, generate points from building a lot, and generate points by developing an engine. There are a variety of different ways you can go about playing this game, and literally every game is going to be different in the way that all of these components come out and how players draft them into their area and what they put together, and the actual moment-to-moment gameplay of putting together all of these different things is a lot of fun. Alright, so that's Steamworks from Tasty Minstrel Games, and it's very interesting. It's unlike most games that I have on my shelf, and unlike most of the games that I've played, in that it's a worker placement game, but you are expanding the number of spaces on which you and your opponents can place your workers. So it's ever evolving, and it changes every time you play. And that concept is brilliant, and it's so much fun to look at all these little components and see how you can put them together with the sources and make something fantastic that you want to build, that you want to take the actions on. You want to place your 1 worker out, and instead of doing 1 action, you do 4 actions in 1 placement. Or maybe you really want to use this librarifier, and you just get a bunch of clockwork sources and you place them all around, or you get a source of each type, and you can take 3 different actions because the device that you want to power does a different thing depending on how it's powered. These are wonderful concepts, great ideas, and it's just fantastic to think about. So in that way, Steamworks is a great triumph. It does something that not many other games do. However, it does have some downsides. The early game can feel very slow at times because you're stuck using these Era 1 components, and they don't do the greatest things. They don't give you a big boost in building that engine, in making what you want to make, in realizing your ultimate vision for this game, and you're stuck with smaller devices, one component and one source. Maybe you get a size 3, but you're not really getting into the meat. So by the time age 1 is over, some players might already be a little turned off. In age 2, however, that's when the game really starts to show that brilliance, those concepts, these ideas that the game has, and it really starts to come together. And players will suddenly see, oh, I can do that. Oh, I can build that, and I see how this comes together. I see what I can do. And now you start to build bigger devices, and you start to see other players' devices and start to really want to go over there. You want to use theirs. In age 1, you wanted to go to other players' devices, maybe, because they might have gotten the one thing that helps you gain more sources faster, or helps you gain components with fewer restrictions, not just the last one at the end of the conveyor belt. But for the most part, you're kind of in your own zone. Age 2, it all opens up. And then by age 3, you've finished up building these machines that are going to generate your points, and now you're running them, and you're running them over and over. Now this sounds great. Finally, everything's coming to fruition. You're gaining all your victory points. It's wonderful. You're racing your opponents to see who can fire off their engines more frequently and with greater efficiency to earn more points by the time the game ends. And maybe you're rushing to trigger the end of the game by going on the other player's components. Maybe you're worried about one opponent and the other one's trailing, so you keep going to the trailing opponent's devices to speed the game up while you're still ahead of the threatening player. And you have all these different interactions, and it's very interesting. But the arc of the game can feel like you're starting slow, building up to something exciting, and then sort of like plateauing with a monotony of earning those victory points. Yeah, it's a race, and it can be exciting, but it can also feel very much the same on every turn. I do this, I gain my automaton, I trigger as much resource that I'm trying to spend for points. Now I'm triggering my device that earns me points off of that particular resource. But that can be adjusted, and it's not in the rules, but you can adjust how many of those clock tokens go on each age. You can make age 1 end very quickly by reducing the number of tokens there. Or you can make age 2 span out a little bit longer so you have more time to build. So maybe you want to have age 1 and 2 bleed together and have a lot more opportunity there. And then maybe you only want age 3 to last just so long. So whoever's really good about firing off their engines is rewarded, but you don't linger doing the same thing over and over. And I think it's good for players to experiment with that. But that also means that I don't necessarily think that what's printed on the board is exactly perfect for all player counts. I love the 2-player game in particular. There's a certain rule in the 2-player game that I think could be adapted for the multiplayer game, where those clock tokens, well, in a 2-player game it's money, those stacks of coins will deplete by 1 each and every round, regardless of whether the players place on their opponent's sources. So that speeds the game up. That speeds things up, and it makes you really want to work hard to build and do and achieve what you're trying to achieve with all of your devices and your particular engine, your particular strategy for generating points. I really like that, and with the addition of more of those clockwork tokens in the multiplayer game, I think that that particular mechanic of pulling one off each round would help immensely. In the larger games that I've played, there have been moments where I'm thinking, well, this is dragging, and I don't want to feel that. But the good thing about it is that that's easily remedied with a simple mechanic that's already part of the game that just might need a little tweaking. And it might just be for your particular group. It might not be the fault of the game. It might be the players that you play with. Maybe everything flies with the players that you're playing with, but maybe things drag. Still, the important thing is that the game is unique and interesting. And that's really exciting. There are so many of these components, and they do such different things. And the idea that, one component might be powered by 3 different types of sources and do 3 different things is brilliant. And that a different component can only function with one type of source, whereas another component only functions with a different type of source. So you have to diversify, and you have to plan, and you have to be ready for everything that's going to come up that you might want. And it's just awesome to see the way these things build together. And it's very satisfying to build your machines. It's a lot of fun. It's like Legos. Any kid knows you sit down with Legos and you build whatever you want. That's a lot of fun. That's the premise of building blocks. Just a classic children's toy. And this has that toy feeling to it. Really good. You're building a worker placement game in front of you, and that's super cool. It is going to have a bit of that downtime where players are puzzling things out for themselves. You may know what you want to do, and another player may be analyzing. But most of the time, you're thinking about your own stuff anyway. So you might be waiting, but it also might give you the chance to see new ideas that you may not have thought of before. So while it may fluctuate between like a 3 and a 4 for me, I'm going to settle on a 4 here because when I see the game or when someone mentions the game, I think, oh, Steamworks, really cool game. I don't think, oh yeah, it's alright, take it or leave it. I think it's a really cool game, and it makes me happy, and it's fun to play. So that's Steamworks, Tasty Minstrel Games, designed by Alex Churchill, 2 to 5 players. We're giving it a 4 out of 5. I'm Eddie Inzauto. This is GamerNode.com. Thanks for watching. If you like our videos, please do give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Get all our new videos as they come out. Of course, follow us on Twitter @GamerNode and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/GamerNode. And of course, head over to GamerNode.com. And if you really want to hear more, listen in on iTunes and Stitcher. Subscribe to the GamerNode Show podcast, our podcast here at GamerNode, where we'll talk about board games and video games. Again, thanks for watching. I'm Eddie Inzauto. Until next time, have fun out there.